Next up, we are going into our main sessions. The first session is designing for enterprise complexity. We have our very own well-known speaker, um, fellow fellow tweeter, Adit Gupta. He's going to take us through this. Please give him a welcome. And Adit, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Hey, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you and your family are all safe and fine. So let's get started. I'll share my screen. Okay. Yeah, I'm Adit Gupta. I'm the design manager here for the customer service management team, which is one of the business units of ServiceNow. And today I'll be talking about designing for enterprise complexity. Now, this topic is close to my heart, and it has shaped my thinking over the years. And in fact, it has not only shaped my thinking, but my thinking has also shaped it. So it goes both the ways. So before we begin, I would like to have a brief intro about myself. I have been designing products for about a decade now. I started as a technology evangelist and a Python lead, and thereafter moved into design. Since then, I have worked for various startups, companies across different domains like retail, travel, finance, payments, and enterprise. And when I am not designing, you can either find me playing with my kid or into some philosophical debate. Okay. So, talking about enterprise design, you might have heard some certain adjectives floating around on the interweb. One of them is wicked. I mean, it's usually said that we are dealing with wicked problems. There are like n number of papers written on it. It goes even beyond enterprise design, but certainly holds true for it. Complex, yes, that's what we are talking about today. And unfortunately cluttered. It's usually said that, oh, this whole interface is so cluttered, why can't you simplify it? Well, that's not always true, but then that's what you will hear this adjective most of the time when we are talking about enterprise design. And overarching all these adjectives is the most dreaded noun, legacy. So you will see that most companies at some point or the other are always dealing with legacy softwares. But the bigger question is that why do we have all these things? Like, what's so different with enterprise design? So, to begin with, we have multiple stakeholders. So, for example, I work for one of the business units of ServiceNow, but I always collaborate with other business units. I collaborate with other stakeholders. And there are times when there are competing demands with stakeholders. So, you have to balance there. So, it's not that easy. Then you have diverse sources of information. So you will see that, especially in enterprise applications, there are multiple systems involved, and these systems are always exchanging information between them. So that also leads to certain complexity. And then we have what we call as tiered personas. So for example, if you look at a typical customer support organization, you will see that the manager who is working along with agents, there's not just one manager. There will be like a supervisor looking at everything. There might be like a senior manager. There will be other managers. And even though all of them fall under this bucket of like manager, but then, I mean, all these personas have certain hierarchy. They are tiered personas. So you have to design for them. And yes, I mean, that's complex. So the point that I want to drive here is that there are more variables when we are talking about enterprise applications. So even though you can maybe, eliminate some of them, some will always remain. So this brings me to my favorite law called as Tesla's law, which was given by Larry Tesla. And Tesla was a computer scientist in the human computer interaction field. And he's well known for the greatest invention of the digital age, cut, copy, paste. I mean, we just can't live without it. And Larry said that for any system, there is a certain amount of complexity which cannot be reduced, and we have to deal with it. So either this complexity is dealt by us in product development, or we give it to our users and let them deal with complexity. And we certainly don't want that as designers. So in today's talk, I'll be mostly focusing on navigating through this complexity. How do you manage complexity so that you don't pass it on to your users? As designers, we want to give them the best experience. We don't want that cluttered thing to come here. We don't want them to get confused. We want them to attain their goals, their tasks. But before that, we have to navigate and manage through this complexity. So the bigger question, in fact, if we go a bit meta level, why does it matter? Like, why does all of this matter? So the first thing is the causal chain. We know that in this universe, everything is connected to everything else and holds true pretty much for even enterprise applications. So let's say you are designing for the health industry or for the defense industry, and certain decisions are made using your tool. And if anything goes wrong there because of the tool, it can have like disastrous effects, both in terms of humanity and property, right? So everything is connected to each other. We have to also always account for those large butterfly effects. So it's like a causal chain. So it's important that we get this right. The other aspect is that enterprise application are always used at workplaces, and they're pretty much part of a process. So if there is an application which is like tough to use, which makes work really hard, it will have impact on process, and in turn that will have impact on people, right? So that's again the causal chain here. And we know that people and process makes the culture. So it's really important that we get this right, because the enterprise application lives pretty much at the heart of everything. And that's why at ServiceNow we say that we make work better. That's pretty much our guiding goal. And we always believe that we want to make work easier for everybody out there. So given that, now let's get into complex problem solving. How do we navigate through this complexity? So the first thing is dealing with the system model. We have talked a bit about like how there are different systems interacting with each other. So let's see, how do we understand this system model? Yeah. So the first thing is that as soon as you start working in a enterprise space, you will see that there are lots of concepts, lots of terminologies, lots of abbreviations, which are pretty much unique to the domain. You will be in fact bombarded with that. So what I suggest is to make your own dictionary along with examples. You can work with subject matter experts. You can work with your peers and understand these terminologies well, so that you don't have any confusions later. The second thing, and in fact this is pretty important, is that you understand the ownership model. So because, as I said, there are multiple stakeholders, there are multiple systems, so we need to understand who owns what, so that we can work really well with them. What are their goals? Because ultimately, in enterprise applications, we have to work collaboratively, because these are like large scale systems and we don't work in silos. So when you are working in collaboration, you need to understand this ownership model. You have to play a non-zero sum game. I mean, which means that you have to play for win-win. So that's why it's worth investing, understanding the ownership model here, right? It's pretty important, because if you don't get it right, then there might be like some confusion later. The third part is to understand the inter-process dependencies well. So there are like n number of systems here, and they are exchanging information. So that's why we talked about having diverse sources of information. But then it's not just important to understand which systems are there, but then how they are communicating with each other, and how the information is passed on to each other. So that's where I propose, or I think that systems thinking is a really good thing that can help you do that. So here on your right, you see some very simple causal diagrams, the cause and effect diagrams. They are coming from this excellent book called as Seeing the Forest for the Trees. And you will see that how cause and effect are connected to each other. There are two ways. One is if the increase in cause can lead to an increase in effect, and we denote it by S, that is, they are in the same direction. Or an increase in cause can lead to a decrease in effect, that is, they are related in opposite direction, and hence denoted by O. So let's take a very simple example here. So let's suppose you have a volume or a certain variety of transactions happening, And as you have more volume or more variety of transactions, there will be more workload. So they are denoted by S because they're in the same direction. If there is more workload, I mean, the ability to cope with it will decrease. I mean, they are in the opposite direction, so we denote it by O. And if your ability to cope decreases, your errors will increase. So again, you have like an opposite relationship here. So again, denoted by O. And as your errors increase, the strain on management increases. And if that increases, the workload again increases. So you see here that using these system thinking diagrams, how can we understand the various relationships between different factors and processes? So what I recommend is that you can spend some time with your team, with the subject matter experts, to understand how the process works and how you can make it like little complex, how you can in fact remove the complexity from there. So now I'll move on towards the process, and this is where we talk about the design process. Okay. So the modus operandi, for the most part, remains the same. So when we are talking about the design process, yeah, we talk about design thinking, and that is applied here in some way. But then there is certain more rigor here. We have to change a bit different things here because there are, as I said, multiple systems interacting. But the basic remains the same. You always begin with asking. That is, you have to understand what are the user needs, what are the business needs, and the more we ask, the more we know. Once you do that, you have to synthesize all that information, because you have to understand that needs, which is like pretty crucial part of any design practice. And once you have synthesized, the last step is to map it. So you have to translate your needs to an interface. I mean, that's how you go from asking your users or knowing from your users to actually going to the interface. So what I personally like to do is to build a sort of a query map, in which I will categorize all my questions into these four big buckets. So all the questions related to business and strategy, where like why we are doing this, why it's important to business, what's our strategy here. So all these you can ask to your stakeholders and subject matter experts. Your questions related to team planning, OKRs, they can all go to your product managers. The questions related to technology, I mean, you also need to have some understanding of technology. They can all go to your engineering team. And I think the biggest bucket for us is user research, because we want to understand both the evident as well as latent needs. So overall, we'll say that in terms of understanding needs, we can like clearly classify them into user needs and business needs. So while business needs, we can get answers from our stakeholders and our subject matter experts. For user needs, we'll have to conduct a user research. Now, there are various methods of conducting user research, but the one which I have found really effective is doing a contextual inquiry. Uh, so the idea here is that you go to the work environment of your customers and observe how they are working there. So while some of their needs would be more evident, they will talk about it, they'll speak about it. But then the advantage of contextual inquiry is that once you go to their workplace, you can also observe their frustrations and how they're working. So this will uncover some of those latent needs. And you can always couple this with other user research methods like user interviews. So once you have collected all this data regarding your user needs and business needs, what I recommend is to segment them further into three categories. That is data needs, functional needs, and contextual needs. So data needs, as the name sounds, are all the things or all the data that the user needs to see on the interface. So there will be some specific things like that the user might want to see, the KPIs the user might want to see about the work items. So all these are like different data needs, and you need to identify that. Second is functional needs. Pretty straightforward. It can be as simple as that I need auto scoping and auto suggestion search, or I need a date range selector. So all the things which will let user go towards their goal, attain their goal. So these are functional needs. And then you have contextual needs. So these are related to either like say device form or time or even social society and culture. So let's say you are designing most of the time for right to left, but then we also have some cultures in which you have to design for left to right. So these are like certain contextual needs which we also need to understand when we are always talking about really empathizing with our users. So, I mean, no presentation, no design presentation can be complete without a post-it notes. So here is an example of a similar kind of a synthesizing exercise that we did internally with our team. And we did the same thing, that we classified into data, functional and contextual needs. And once that was pretty clear, we went ahead with sketches and wireframes. So there are three essential things when we are talking about complex problem solving: sense making, wayfinding, and dealing with data. So sense making is, I mean, as the name sounds, the user should be able to understand what's happening on the interface, what data is there, is it making enough sense for them to go towards their goal. Wayfinding, can they navigate through all this information again to complete their tasks? And data, so you always are dealing with multi-dimensional large amounts of data. So are you just throwing all the data on the screen, or are you making it easier for your user to consume it, to process through it? Now, these diagrams are coming from this, again, from this excellent book called as Complex Problem Solving by Barbara Merrill, highly recommended. And sorry. And there are three, I would say, essential tips that are covered in the book. One is that you understand the pattern of inquiry of your users. So they would be working in a certain way to accomplish their tasks. I mean, these are certain recurring sets of actions and strategies, and they have been like successful in some way in resolving some types of problems. So understand what are these patterns of inquiry when you are doing your research. The next thing is identify what are called as mainline and enabling tasks. Now, mainline tasks are something which lead to a change in content of data display. So something as simple as applying a filter, which will change the data. So this is like a mainline task, pretty important for the user to sort through information. And then there are enabling tasks. They do not change the data content, but they make it possible for user to perform these mainline tasks, which is like going from, let's say, one page to another page, right? To navigating. So identify what are these mainline and enabling tasks, and using that you can identify the task landscape. So let's say the user has to go from, like, starting from A to B. What are the mainline and enabling tasks that the user has to go through to kind of attain it? So your main, I would say, job here is to identify this large task landscape. So here's I mean, just a little example of what we did. Like, we kind of understood how our support agents work, and we observed them in their work environment. We did a contextual inquiry, and we understood, like, what is their intent, what are their primary actions and follow-up actions. And then we further classified into wayfinding, sense making, and data ordeal. And we also identified the mainline and the enabling tasks. So just a little example of how you can do it for your company. So what are the tools here? One of the things is that you can always, you should always conduct knowledge sessions proactively with your subject matter experts and product managers. It really helps, because going ahead with incomplete information is certainly not recommended. So always be in touch with your subject matter experts and product managers. Conduct good facilitation sessions. I mean, for me, I think as a designer, facilitating is a pretty core skill, especially in enterprise design, because you have to collaborate a lot. And what I do, what I call these facilitation sessions are like custom games. So a game because you are playing it together with your product team to solve the problem. So it's just like the pandemic board game in which all the players sit together and they, fight against the pandemic, and ultimately all of them win. So all the product owners have to win together, and that's why I call it custom games. And custom because you can design your own games. And to do that, there is an excellent book called as Game Storming. You can, and it gives you an n number of examples. You can use those games, or you can modify it according to your own needs. Also conduct workshops. There is another excellent book called as Visual Collaboration, which will tell you how to use the space, how to get more input from your product owners. And I think one of the biggest tool here is to document everything. Now, I'm not saying that you should document when the project is over. In fact, you should document as the project is going on. So what I do personally is that I have this host blog on my machine. It's a local instance. It's not shared. And as and when I'm going through a particular project, I'll note down all the things that has happened throughout, like what are the hurdles we faced, how we solved that, and then what we did to, go through this maze and to arrive at the solution. So the advantage is that, first of all, we say that writing is thinking. So as you write, you will discover some of those loopholes. And then once everything is over, it becomes really easy to share it with your team to do knowledge transfer. Okay. So now let's move to mapping the needs to an interface. And let's pick a very small example wherein you have certain customer support agents working in this organization, and they need to resolve customer tickets. I mean, customer, if they have problems, they raise tickets, they come to the support organization. So the agents need to see all the list of, all the support tickets and their details. And let's also assume at this stage that you have done your research and you have already classified and synthesized your research into data, functional, and contextual needs. So what do you do next? So personally, I always begin with creating what I call as information architecture blocks. So I'll take the big chunks of informations. Like in this case, you have a list of tickets, you have like the ticket details, you have search, and you have certain actions related to it. And then play around with these big chunks of information. I mean, let's try to lay it out in different ways. Let's see which is making the most logical sense here. And it's always recommended to have some permutation and combinations of these IA blocks so that you get that clarity. Okay, this is how information goes into different layouts. So in this case, let's go ahead with the left approach, in which you have a kind of a master detail view. You see a list of tickets, and then you see the ticket details. The next step is to lay out all the interface elements, and these are essentially coming from your data and functional needs. So you'll see that we have search there because it's pretty much a functional need. Our agents need to search through tickets. You need to have different types of tickets there. So this is again connected to a data and functional needs. And ultimately, when you select something, you will see data related to those tickets. And then you have certain actions. So the idea here is that you connect each and every interface elements to the data and functional needs that you discovered during your research phase. So once you do this activity, and I understand it's a bit time consuming, but it's really worth it because in this way, you avoid the so-called clutter on the page. You avoid all the things that are not necessary. You remove the things, and you have all those components which are really important for the users to attain their goal. So this way your design becomes like foolproof. I mean, there are no holes there. So this is just a simple example of what I did. It's a kind of a calendar view, sorry, for your agents. And again, you will see that, all the interface elements on the page have been linked to certain functional or data elements here. So this is a very good way of articulating your design decisions. And most of the times, in certain case studies, we also see that, a lot of work is done on defining the persona and defining the user journeys, but then we don't see it connected to the final designs. We don't see it connected to the interface. So what I'm proposing here, that in this way, once you kind of, connect all your research to your interface, it makes complete logical sense. And finally, once you have the general idea of the interface, you connect it to your design systems. So that's where, you identify the components which can go here. Sometimes you might see that certain components don't exist. So you can always collaborate with your engineering and your design systems team to, identify and develop those necessary components. But overall, I would say that don't forget the basics. Always follow the heuristics. We all know the well-known 10 Nielsen-Norman heuristics. So always follow that. And these basics hold true whether you for enterprise design or consumer design or any design. Bridge the gulf of execution and gulf of evaluation. This is coming directly from Don Norman. So you need to bridge this gap wherein the user should understand how to do something and how to understand something. They should not spend like their whole time understanding, how do I do certain thing, or what is this happening on the screen. Sorry. So you need to bridge that gap. There's a well-known principle called as flexibility usability trade-off, which says that the more flexibility you provide to your interface, the less usable it gets, right? So you need to understand by user research that where you can provide like those flexible options, and how you can simplify the screens by either like removing some of them or categorizing them or using progressive disclosure. And finally, this is like a really important quote here from one of the papers on on design, which says that when design teams focus on the ease of use, that is usability, they strive to build the product right. But when they emphasize usefulness, they strive to build the right product. And that's why the role of user research and the role of kind of identifying into data, functional and contextual need is pretty important, because then you emphasize a lot on usefulness. So finally, I would recommend building your own playbook as you grow your role into the enterprise industry. The first thing is facilitation. So yeah, because as I said, you have to collaborate a lot, develop your own custom games. Eventually, you will find that some of these facilitation sessions work well for certain kind of problems, and then some other work well in certain different kinds of problems. So in your playbook, kind of document all the sessions that have really helped you in solving the problems. Make a lot of diagrams. Personally, I like it a lot. We had an example of a systems diagram. There are n number of diagrams out there, like you have flowcharts, the most basics ones, but there are many more out there. So explore them so that you can express your thoughts more clearly. Take help of mental models. Now there are like lots of mental models out there. Two of my favorites are Occam's razor and inversion. So Occam's razor simply says that go with a solution which has the least number of assumptions. Makes a lot of sense. Least number of assumptions, less complex. So yeah, that might be a good solution. And inversion is something to look at a problem from the opposite angle. So let's say we say that we want to make this interface simple. You take it from the other side, like how do I make it more complex, and then you understand the things which are making it complex and then remove them. And there are more mental models here, and we'll be sharing like a PDF file after this talk, which will have list of all the books and all the mental models that I have talked about in this talk. And then stories, I mean, nothing is complete without stories. You should always document it, that how did you solve that particular problem, what hurdles you faced. And when you are kind of going ahead in your careers, sometimes these stories can really help you go through the muddle. So I hope that this talk might have like helped you or enlightened you in certain way. And again, thank you for joining us today. And I think we can either open the floor for questions, or we can take it later. Thank you.